Welcome to our live lunch hour. I'm Jillian Graber, Executive Director of Protect PT, and today we have Ryan Hamilton from Fair Shake with us, as well as Josh Eisenfeld. Say hi, guys. And we already have Lois is here with us. Hi, Lois. Thanks for coming in today. I'm just still trying to get my screen set up a little bit, so bear with me for a minute, and then we'll start our presentation. All right, I think I have everything ready to go. Thank you to Anne and Mary. They're actually on, you can't see them, but they're on background, just helping with some tech support. Mary is going to be fielding some questions, so if you have questions for our speakers, please put them in the comments section of our YouTube, and we can also share this. This will be shared on our Facebook as well, and so we'll get to as many questions as we possibly can. But so today we have Fair Shake with us, and we're going to talk about a couple different things here. And you know, we have been working with Fair Shake since we started Protect PT back in 2000. Well, we started organizing in 2014 and became a nonprofit in 2015. And so Fair Shake's been with us the whole time. And we have several different cases that Ryan's going to update us on. And so I think we should just, you know, kind of dive right in and get started. So Ryan, why don't you kind of maybe give us a little bit of background about yourself and your role at Fair Shake, and then Josh, you could do that as well. That would be great.
Sure. Yeah, I'm an attorney at Fair Shake Environmental Legal Services. We're a nonprofit environmental law firm based out of Pittsburgh and Akron, Ohio. And I've been working with Fair Shake now for a few years, and was lucky enough to join with some of our other attorneys and Jillian when they were kind of starting organizing for Protect PT. And we've had a great opportunity to continue working together over the last couple of years. That's my general background. Yeah.
All right, Josh, how about you?
My name is Josh Eisenfeld. I'm our marketing director here at Fair Shake. And I've been with Fair Shake for a year and a half now. And my background is in communications and marketing, content creation. And, you know, I enjoy working with our clients in these situations because it helps us, you know, go beyond the courtroom. There's only so much that can be done there, but a lot of things happen outside of it. So I'm happy to help in that way, and I'm happy to be here too.
Great. Well, thanks so much for joining us. I know that our viewers, have been increasing every week, so we're really excited. Last week we had some youth activists on, and next week we're going to be restreaming stuff, and we'll tell you a little bit about that later. But one of the things that we wanted to start out by talking about was some of the cases that we have going on right now. So Ryan, why don't you talk to us a little bit about some of the updates and statuses of our cases? And so I think the first thing, maybe we could start with our Gaia and Metis case and kind of give an overview of that.
Yeah, of course. We've worked on numerous cases with Protect PT. The Gaia and Metis case is a really interesting one where Protect PT has challenged the zoning approval for two different well pads that were proposed in Penn Township, the Gaia well pad and the Metis well pad. And I think just where we're at in the case, we appealed the zoning hearing board decision to the county level court. Unfortunately, we weren't successful there, but we've since appealed that to the state level Commonwealth Court. And we just had oral argument on that case this past February in front of the Commonwealth Court. Jillian and Anne were there to join me for it. It was a really interesting argument. I think there's some interesting issues at play in this case that could potentially change the way we think about zoning oil and gas development. In particular, in this case, Protect PT brought on several different public health experts who provided substantial opinion about the impacts of developing an unconventional well pad in the community, but in particular, developing well pads number 10 and 11 in the community. So these aren't the first. They may not be the last, but our argument is primarily that the cumulative impacts of developing all of these well pads are so great that the public health, safety, and welfare is put at risk. And that's one of the kind of really interesting issues that's in front of the Commonwealth Court right now.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that stuck out. Oh, I'm on mute. Sorry, guys. I think one of the things that stuck out in my mind when we were in the courtroom and you were doing your oral argument is that the judges were questioning at what point is too much. At what point are these too many well pads? And when they realize, like, oh wait, this is 11 and 12 out of all the well pads that have been proposed in the township. I think that they were kind of taken aback by that. I hope that hits home, and that was something that was brought up back when Apex Energy, one of the first developers, started handing in applications to the township. At the time, one of the people that worked at the township said, well, where is the saturation point here? And at that time, it was only 7 well pads that were being proposed. And now we have 12 that have been proposed. So, it's crazy to think that, that many more well pads are being proposed, that many more well pads are going to be built eventually, and that citizens like us, we have very few tools at our disposal. So I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about that because, we have a photo up here. If you guys can see, Anne's on the background providing some context for us and some photos. These are photos of us with a couple experts that we brought to the zoning hearing board. Dr. Ranajit Sahu came to talk about risk assessment at a few hearings we had, as well as Beth Weinberger from the Environmental Health Project came and talked as well. And then the bottom one is actually one of the experts from the industry that you're cross-examining. So I'd like to talk a little bit about what Protect PT does to prepare for these hearings and how that's important when preparing, to potentially have to challenge this at a higher court level.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess, the preparation that goes into these hearings on of Protect PT is really substantial. There's a lot of groundwork that happens before we ever show up at the municipal building for a hearing. Importantly, and one thing that I personally really enjoy about working with Protect PT is that Protect PT has done really well organizing and bringing on residents who are members and engaging their community in the conversation, but before these hearings ever happen. So that's incredibly important and necessary, really, to participate in these in a meaningful way. But in addition to that, along with myself and other attorneys at Fairshake, Protect PTs reviewing permit documents and applications and potentially working with experts, again, all before these hearings ever happen. So there's a lot that goes into it. And if I could make one recommendation to folks who are thinking about engaging in this process, it's to do so early and to reach out to someone like Protect PT or Fairshake to get their thoughts as early on in the process as you can.
Yeah, and actually that brings up a good point, Ryan, because one of the services and one of the things that we provide as a nonprofit organization is trying to help other communities do that. We have a mentorship program. If you go to mentorship on our website, you can get you can have conversations with our staff, to try to talk through some of these issues. And usually, when there's an issue that becomes to a legal conversation, we say you should probably talk to Fair Shake because that's beyond what we do. We kind of try to mobilize the community and talk to the community members and educate them, because I think that's a huge part of why people don't participate in local hearings. They just don't know what to say, and they don't know, they haven't done the research. And I don't know how a community member would ever be able to do the type of research on their own. I mean, there have been there have been cases, I can't talk today, where there have been community members that really have stepped up to the plate and done a lot of the research on their own, and gone to court on their own, and those efforts should be commended. But it's really difficult to do that. It's also costly, and one of the things that we really appreciate about Fair Shake is that we're a nonprofit. We have really limited resources. Our stakeholders are the community members, and so as a nonprofit yourselves, you can help us in a way that we would never be able to afford otherwise. Um, so, um, so I think that that's a really important point to make about Fair Shake, and one of the things that we really appreciate. So, Lois was asking, and maybe kind of for a breakdown of the court system hierarchy for folks, kind of a top down, that she would really appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, uh, where to start? So there's, I mean, there's obviously, well, nothing's obvious, right? There are federal courts, and those federal courts probably start with the most well-known court, the United States Supreme Court. They're kind of at the top, and then there are you know regional courts below that. For example, the Third Circuit Court, out of the Philadelphia area, that hears cases from a certain region. And then there's also federal district courts. So in Pennsylvania, for example, in this area, we often practice before the federal Western District Court of Pennsylvania. In fact, in the district, in that federal court is where you'll find a lot of environmental citizen suits, like a Clean Water Act or Clean Air Act suits. But even I guess sort of below the federal courts, there are state level courts, and in Pennsylvania we have the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. But below that we have two sort of appellate level courts: the Superior Court and also the Commonwealth Court. In most cases that we're involved with, relating to local agency decision making, for example, end up in front of that Commonwealth Court if they're appealed there. And then one step below them, we have the county level courts of common pleas, and a majority of any legal case will start in those courts. So, for example, there's a Westmoreland County Court of Common Pleas. But then in a lot of the zoning cases that Protect PT has worked on, the actual sort of evidence that ends up in front of those other courts is actually established in front of a local zoning body. And depending on where you are and what the issue is, it could be a zoning hearing board or even in front of a board of supervisors. So that's the general overview.
Great. And Seth was actually asking, he's on our YouTube, commenting in, hi Seth, good to have you with us. He was asking if the Commonwealth oral argument was the one in front of Pitt Law earlier this year. And I
Yes,
think
it
that,
was.
yeah,
Yeah.
which we had never been to that building before. Usually we're downtown at the courthouse. And so I think I just wanted to mention that, this particular operator, the one that we were at Pitt Law, you were arguing in front of the Commonwealth Court. This particular operator right now has 300 violations, and they've only been in business for a year and a half. So, I think this also brings up another issue that we have these systems put in place, this oversight put in place, and we, citizens groups like Protect PT and nonprofits like Fair Shake work to try to protect the community in one way by litigating, but also we would try to protect the community by trying to have the laws that are put in place enforced. And so when the laws are not enforced, the company gets violations. And so unfortunately, we're in a state where we have an agency that's supposed to oversee those state and federal laws, known as the PA Department of Environmental Protection, and their job is to inspect those well pads and make sure that the operators are following the law. And in this case, we have an operator over 300 violations, not been operating very long, and still able to get permits, still able to get new permits, even while breaking the law, which is one thing that really irritates me as a mom. If I went out and broke the law, I would be getting put in jail. But these guys, they're breaking the law, several times a week. And, they get a letter from the department. Eventually that could result in a fine. In one case that we dealt with, and we'll talk about some of our other cases in a little bit, but in one case that we dealt with, we waited for 2.5 years to see fines from the Department of Environmental Protection. So what do you tell citizens when they get frustrated like that? What do you tell them they can do?
Yeah, that's a good question. The legal process, whether it is oversight by government agencies, or the permitting process that's directed by government agencies, or the legal process in front of the courts, is very often uh, it's a slow moving process, and often a very frustrating process, with hurdles for individual citizens who aren't thinking about this every day, hurdles for them to overcome, certainly. So I think it's important for people to remember that there are opportunities to participate in this process. Protect PT has taken advantage of many of them. And there are experts out there that you can reach out to that can help you participate in this process. And I think ultimately, don't lose hope. A lot of people have done this over many years, and there's always going to be certainly room for improvements, and it often takes the pressure of citizens who are concerned about these things to make those changes. So I think keep on going.
I think that's good advice, Ryan. Thank you. Um, so now I want to move on to our substantive validity challenge, because we just actually yesterday
Mhm.
heard back from the court on that. So do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. So this is a case that I've been working with Protect PT on for a number of years now. I believe the Penn Township oil and gas zoning ordinance was revised around, was it 2016? I think so. And in that revision, the township decided to enact a mineral extraction overlay district. So this is essentially a zoning district that covers a majority of the township that permitted unconventional natural gas development, as well as other industrial activities in areas of the community that are clearly primarily residential. And this creates a number of conflicts between property uses and certainly puts health and safety at risk. So Protect PT brought a challenge to this ordinance. That challenge started again in front of the local zoning hearing board. It quickly went to the county level court where evidence was presented by both sides. I think we had, I can't remember now if it was two or maybe 4 days of hearing in front of the county level court with experts about public health and zoning, and it was an exciting time. That court, the county level court, denied the challenge, unfortunately. But we Protect PT appealed that decision, citing kind of what we saw as numerous flaws in the opinion. Primarily, one of them that comes to mind is the idea that this hydraulic fracturing process is only temporary. The impacts are only related to construction, and based on the expert testimony that Protect PT presented, we think that's clearly not the case. These are impacts that are going to reoccur and that are going to affect the community over a very long period of time. So in front of the state Commonwealth Court, then we made those arguments. And interestingly, the Commonwealth Court seemed to agree with us on the law, that the zoning hearing board should have taken the entire process into consideration, but unfortunately decided not to overrule that lower county court decision. So again, we appealed that to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. We worked with Wood's Law Office as well as a co-counsel, and I think we did really an excellent job putting together the petition. But unfortunately, just yesterday we heard from the Pennsylvania Supreme Court that they denied the petition, meaning that the case is effectively over. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court is not going to make any ruling on the case. Unfortunately, they don't provide any explanation in that opinion about why they made that decision. I think there's a lot of factors that go into it about what the issues are, what the cases that had come previously said, what they anticipate will happen in the future. So I think the outcome tells us that, probably one of the best ways to change the outcome of these zoning decisions is to engage in the legislative process. And that can mean everything from voting in local elections to even petitioning your local legislator, your supervisors or commissioners to make changes to their zoning ordinances.
Well, and Ryan, I think you make a really good point. We put a tremendous amount of effort into that case, and there were earlier cases that were put before the Supreme Court that protected, that the Supreme Court found that our Article 1, Section 27 rights were protected under the Constitution, and that was one of the things that we talked about in our challenge. And if you'll go to the next screen, not only did we have a petition to the local government with over 825 signatures, but we also, this is the mineral extraction overlay. So this is what we were trying to accomplish, getting rid of this mineral extraction overlay, because this covers 60% of the total land in Penn Township. And so you can see it really lumps all of the, agricultural zoned areas and all the industrial zoned areas together. And we had a zoning expert come from Penn, Dr. Daniels, talk about that and talk about the fact that this was not, this kind of zoning overlay scheme was not, what zoning was meant to, was not accomplishing what zoning was meant to do. So, well, obviously we're disappointed, more than disappointed. But I think that the support that we received from the community is really important, and I think that the support we continue to receive from the community is going to be even more important going forward, because it's going to make our job harder. So up until this point, out of 12 well pads that have been proposed, only 2 have been built, and that's because we have been resisting so much, and we've been litigating these cases. But now, essentially, these operators that have violations to state and federal law can come into our neighborhood and can cause noise and air pollution again and again and again. And they can violate state and federal law and do that at the same time. And one thing that I want to point out, the Supreme Court said that they weren't going to make the decision, or they didn't accept our petition. But the lower court mentioned that this is a temporary process. Right now, one of the operators could potentially be gearing up near the Poseidon well site. There were 2 wells that were drilled and fracked, and residents that were impacted when that happened about a year ago, and that's going to happen again and again and again, because they have more than 2 wells proposed for that site. Some of these sites have 5 or more wells proposed, some even more than that, 10. We just really don't know. One of the things that I thought was really interesting was when we were before the zoning hearing board, and one of the operators, Huntley and Huntley, they were proposing an impoundment in our community, and we had kind of looked through the DEP records, and we found this water plan, and we thought, they can use this impoundment and feed other well pads outside of Penn Township, and really truck water in and out of our community willy-nilly. And we thought that was what was going to happen. And they said, oh no, we don't have plans to do that. But then, you brought up the water plan that they submit to the DEP, and they said, well, we don't know where those other well pads are, this expert, and you put up the map and said, well, here you go, here's a map. And we really caught them in a position that they weren't really willing to reveal that information to the zoning hearing board, but it was revealed to the DEP. So there is a lot of power in preparation, and a lot of power in finding those documents at the DEP, and it's simply using the facts that are presented by the industry that wants to develop, to really talk to the zoning hearing board and bring those facts to light, because some of those facts they don't really want to share right away. So Lois has a question. She says, can PA's environmental hearing board be considered a quasi-judicial court like the zoning hearing board?
Yes, they are sort of a quasi-judicial court like the zoning hearing board. Similar to the zoning hearing board, they have jurisdiction to hear very specific types of cases. So the environmental hearing board is actually, sort of a separate arm of the Department of Environmental Protection, and they hear cases related to the DEP agency decision making. That's their primary jurisdiction.
And really quick, we do have a case that we're working on in front of the environmental hearing board. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, Ryan?
Yeah, sure. So this case is this is an appeal of a permit issued by the DEP for the Draculic well pad, which you can see on the map here. And in maybe almost 2 years ago now, we filed an appeal of the issuance of the drill and operate permit. And that the basis for that appeal is really twofold. First, there were significant deficiencies that we found in the operator's emergency response plan. And second, there were major concerns about this operator's ability to control erosion and sedimentation at the site. So we brought this appeal, and it's been ongoing in front of the Environmental Hearing Board. I think our goal really is to ensure that we can get the best protections for those community members who live in Penn Township, and particularly near this well pad. And so no final decisions yet, but it'll be interesting to see where this one goes.
Yeah. And this well pad, I should mention, it's right here on the map. It's hard to see because the map is so small, but this well pad is on the border with, I'm sorry, it's this one. Thank you, Anne. Anne's in the background showing me which one it is on the map. This is on the border of Penn Township and Trafford. I should mention, I actually live in Trafford. This well pad is a quarter mile from my house. And you can see all the white is all the residential neighborhoods that are in Penn Township. Up here, that's not on the map, are all the other residential neighborhoods that are in Trafford. So if you take a half mile around this well pad, you're going to find that if there is an emergency, you're going to have to evacuate thousands of people. And I know that I have a lot of elderly neighbors. I have a lot of neighbors that have just had kids, so they have infants in their family. And me personally, like, this is the one big thing that I have a problem with. And you know that, because, I don't want to have to explain to my kids why I have to leave our house in the middle of the night. And that's one of the big sticking points for me. And that's why we really do what we do. And of course, every time I talk about this, I get upset, but, I think it's just like, it's kind of the mom that comes out in me. When we think about, these things that are right near our houses. This is, this industrial development that we've never seen in our community before. This is a residential, very bedroom community. And anything could happen. I mean, they're drilling down thousands of miles in, thousands of feet in the earth. And, there's a lot of unknowns. There's a lot of, potential for human error. There's a lot of, potential when you're drilling for an explosive gas. And these are the concerns that I think a lot of the community members have just from talking to the community members. And this is actually one of the first well pads that was proposed in Penn Township, and why Protect PT exists in the first place, because we had members come together in the community that said, we're in Penn Township, we're right near this well pad, we're in Trafford, we're right near this well pad, and we just want, we want the protection that we deserve from our Pennsylvania Constitution and the right to feel safe in our home. And that's really what we're fighting for. So I just want to point that out. And Lois says persons who use life-sustaining devices have to be considered, like oxygen or sleep apnea machines, and at-home ventilators. So thank you, Lois, for that. Lois has a great background, and she's actually our board chair. She was on our talk a couple weeks ago. And, she makes a good point. I worry about my elderly neighbors getting out in time. If there is an accident, I worry about the amount of effort that it will take a volunteer fire department, potentially 2-3 volunteer fire departments. Like, do they have the proper gear? Do they have all of the detectors needed to make sure that the gas, is detected properly, to make sure the residents are safe and secure? And how will they accomplish actually getting us all out? So we want to make sure that, this evacuation is actually possible. So that's that. I mean, I think that really kind of talks about our Dracula case pretty well. We also do stuff on other communities beyond the Penn Township. We just recently had a case last year in Murraysville with Titan, and this was a very different case before Murraysville. And do you want to talk about that a little bit, Ryan? Because I have a perspective on it, but I want to hear your perspective first.
Oh, I'm muted. Okay. Sure. So, yeah, it was an interesting case. I mean, every municipality has a different body of individuals that you're hearing a case before, and they also have different standards in their ordinances. So every community really is unique in that sense. And in front of Murraysville, this was a proposed well pad, like you mentioned, the Titan well pad. And there were, again, both parties brought in a number of witnesses, experts who testified about everything from public health to noise impacts. And I think there was a lot of participation by Murraysville community members as well that Jillian and her team helped organize and prepare for this hearing. In that case, the Murraysville Council decided to grant approval, but they granted approval subject to something like 15 or 20 different conditions. So in a lot of these zoning hearings, there's an opportunity for the council to say, okay, we approve this development, but you need to first think through or meet X, Y, and Z. So in this case, they imposed some I think fairly rigorous conditions on the development related to traffic controls and other impacts to try to reduce that impact on the community.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that kind of stuck out in my mind with that whole process was the thoroughness that the Murraysville Council took when evaluating the documents. And we have a really different situation here in Penn Township. One of the things that kind of those sites have in common, some of the sites in our community here in Penn Township and the site that's in Murraysville right across the line, some of the similarities are things like roadways. How do you get a caravan of triaxle vehicles on some of these really like winding, narrow back country roads? That's been a big issue. And actually, if you recall, I think one of the first couple cases that you worked with us on, Ryan, when O'Day left, were the three well pads, Metis, Gaia, and White well pad. And those three well pads, I'm sorry, not Metis and Gaia, White, Beatty, and Draftina. There's so many, I get confused. But those three well pads initially were denied by the zoning hearing board in Penn Township. One of the reasons that they cite in their findings of fact and conclusions of law for that is the roadway being inadequate. And as a result of those three denials, and I will never forget the look on the faces of the oil and gas company, just utter shock that we presented evidence and that these well pads were denied. But they had really good reasons for doing it. And one of the reasons were the roadways, because they were inadequate. And so I think that Murraysville took some of this into consideration, and they actually put a lot of conditions on the roadways. They have to widen the road, and the roads in these back countries are they're not great to begin with. So we see that there's going to be a lot of impacts to our community that we're not going to have protection against because in those three well pads that were initially denied, the gas company sued the township for $380 million. So the township really caved and said, well, okay, I guess we'll approve all these well pads with these conditions. And there were, I believe, 7 or 8 conditions, which are not nearly as strong and rigorous as the conditions that were imposed in Murraysville. Not nearly. Um, and so that's one thing that folks can do. It's not just about getting a well pad denied, and we're not in it to have a well pad either proposed or denied. What we're trying to do is just protect the community and bring to light those things that are about the project that are unsettling, that have not been thought through, that could potentially impact the community. And hopefully the community can decide for themselves. And unfortunately, sometimes the community, being the zoning hearing boards and the council, sometimes they don't do it the right way. And in our opinion, that's what happened in Penn Township. But that's certainly something that was a little different in Murraysville. They still approved it, but there were many more conditions, really strict conditions that imposed. And then on top of that, after that is approved, what happens next? Then the municipality has the burden to make sure that those things are upheld, just very similar to the zoning hearing or the DEP and what is under their jurisdiction. So do you have any comments on that? You're on mute.
There we are. Yeah. Yeah, I guess what this makes me think of is just the idea that I think a lot of times communities and even municipal leaders feel like the stage is set and they're just part of an inevitable outcome. But I think that's absolutely not the case. What we've seen through a lot of our work over the past several years is that municipalities actually have quite a bit of power to decide either through the legislative process or through the zoning process to decide what development occurs and how it occurs. And I think there's opportunities there to really direct how your community develops over the long term. And so I think there's ways to engage in that process, and there's some real power there that can be taken advantage of.
Yeah, and so what are some things that communities can do to prepare for these challenges?
Yeah, I guess that's a good thought. So I would say even before you start thinking about a challenge, I would, very very first of all, I would take a look at your community's zoning ordinance, kind of evaluate what it allows, what it doesn't, what the how the comprehensive plan, if your community has one, how it's thinking about development in the community over the long term. And I think there's an opportunity to engage in that legislative process to change those ordinances, first of all. But if certain development is proposed in your municipality and the ordinance is already set, and you're thinking this is something that for any number of reasons is going to cause problems, I think there's first of all, you need to be aware of the timeline, right? There's often very specific timelines that apply here. Once an application for approval is submitted to the township, there's often only a certain amount of time before a hearing must be held and before decisions at that hearing must happen as well. So it's important to kind of be keeping an eye on what's happening and participating in those community meetings. And it's important to be aware of when these things are proposed, because there's, as Protect PT has shown, there's a lot of legwork that can be done in advance. Talking with neighbors, retaining legal counsel or other experts. There's things that can happen far in advance that I think can help with the ultimate outcome of these things.
Yeah, and so we're going to move on. Thank you, Ryan. I think that this is a really good discussion, and we did a webinar actually last year, the year before. It's on Halt the Harm Network's website. So if you go to Halt the Harm Network, we actually really go into depth about how to prepare for a hearing. So I want to give a shout out to Halt the Harm. You can find it on their website and learn more about that if you want to. And then one last question, then we'll have Josh talk about some other subjects. But this is actually a question from Anne, and she had a really wonderful question. Could you discuss some of the recent changes to the that the EPA has made to the environmental regulations, like the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Rule, and what can residents do about those things?
Yeah, sure. Tough to know where to start with this. I was so in the past several years there have been well, there's always changes to regulations and environmental regulations in particular, but over the past several years there have been some really significant changes that are seen as creating a sort of a rollback on those protections for the environment and for human health. And in particular, I guess just recently, there was a in April there were kind of two major revisions. One to the Clean Air Act related to the uh, mercury emissions from coal-fired power plants. And in that scenario, the EPA revised the regulation based in part on a Supreme Court ruling saying that the emissions controls that were necessary under the regulation before it was revised were, not cost effective. So the idea being that any further reductions would require too much expense in terms of technology and emissions controls to justify the increased protections for public health. So I think that's really concerning to see that regulations that are already in place to protect public health are being revised. Similarly, thinking about the Clean Water Act, in the past couple of weeks, there was also a revision to the federally protected waterways. So in that case, they removed federal oversight of ephemeral waterways, or those waterways that are really fed by rain or snowmelt. And I think in that case, there's already been a challenge filed in court to that. In fact, I was, I think there's probably almost 100 lawsuits pending related to Trump administration changes to the regulations. So there's a lot happening. To be honest, I can't keep up with all of it, but there's a lot of litigation happening there as well. And I guess lastly, I just want to mention we've also had a really, I think, positive change in the law related to a U.S. Supreme Court decision that recently came down this past month as well. That's the Maui decision, and in that case, the issue in front of the court was whether a permit is required for pollution originating from a point source but conveyed to a navigable water through a non-point source. So in that case, groundwater. And in that case, the Supreme Court actually said, yes, a permit is required if the addition of pollutants is through groundwater and it's the functional equivalent of your typical point source direct discharge to the stream. So it really opens up the potential for the need for permits in cases where we previously didn't think it was going to be required. And I think it's ultimately going to result in some litigation, probably from all sides, depending on how things play out. But it's interesting to see that these changes are all happening at the same time. And I think what community members can do is continue to engage in what's happening around you. I mean, in particular, I think Fair Shake just put out a blog post in the last couple of weeks about what community members can do to during this COVID-19 crisis. And I think the scenario is the same. It's about monitoring and keeping an eye on what's happening around you. It's about documenting evidence when you see problems, and it's about reaching out to groups like Protect PT or legal counsel like Fair Shake to help you try to address these things.
Well, and Ryan, actually, you bring up a good point, and Josh or Ryan, whoever wants to field this question, and then and Josh, I know you have some stuff you want to talk about before the hour is up, but we have a question from Joe, and she asks, do you know how the timelines for application approvals are being impacted by COVID-19 restrictions?
So I'll just mention, so at the state level, at least with the Pennsylvania DEP, it's my understanding that applications are still being reviewed and permits are still being issued, but there's no longer a permit review guarantee for a certain timeline. So things are taking longer, things are moving more slowly, but still happening, still occurring.
Yeah, and just maybe an important point to follow up on that, and something that goes against communities, unfortunately, is that at the same time, while things are moving forward, certain parts of the process have not been changed. So the commenting periods we're seeing aren't changing yet. The most important thing in a comment is getting access to information. You need to do right to know requests, and the DEP is clearly, in a situation they've never been in before, where a lot of them are working from home. They don't have access to get us the information we need. So there's a double standard being put on in some ways, but it's something that we're trying to help people navigate through. We've gotten a lot of questions like that for sure over the last month or two.
Yeah, and Josh, we actually put up while you guys were discussing, we put up the Fair Shake blog. Josh, you write these blogs, right? Or you help write them?
So sometimes, yeah. They're always a collaborative effort. I can't do anything without these guys' knowledge and these ladies' knowledge too, and girls. But it's definitely. I guess it just depends on the actual blog post. That one I think was a tag team effort between myself and Tim, who's actually in the picture that you're showing right now on the far left, and Emily Collins, our executive director. But we wanted just to do something at the very beginning of the stages to answer some of these questions, because people did seem desperate for answers and feeling a little bit hopeless, and it's a tough time right now. So it's good to provide any kind of hope you can.
Yeah, and so can you tell us a little bit more about some of the work that that Fair Shake does and communities that tend to be most impacted by oil and gas development?
Yeah. So the cool thing about Fair Shake is we really run the gamut on like the types of work that we do. And I think that the types of communities that we work in, it's predominantly, as you'd expect, rural communities or suburban communities where there's lots of land. We don't see, you've seen the old pictures from like the 1800s where like wells are right next to houses or through front porches. That's not happening here. We would know that if it was. So we work a lot in rural areas like we're seeing in this picture right now. And in our area, there's, the topography causes lots of different concerns for people. So there is a lot of concern in rural communities, despite the fact that these same rural communities are also suffering from economic problems. So that's another thing that goes hand in hand. The type of communities we work in tend to be communities that are struggling economically and really do need this kind of economic boost. So, I think often people get pitted against each other because of this economic problem. The real issue is economics. It's not fracking or oil and gas, right? Like we all know that we need some sort of stimulus here in these kinds of Rust Belt communities, these rural communities. And so that's an issue that we're well aware of because that's right where we work. So we also, in addition to working in Pennsylvania, are working in Ohio, and also, and soon we'll be working in West Virginia too. So that's some exciting news. Yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, for sure. And so what are I'm sorry, I'm just trying to look here. So what are some resources Fair Shake can provide to communities?
I think we've gone over some of the key components of what we can do for communities, but it's also like one side of the solutions that we can provide. So a lot of what we talked about today is defense work, right? Like helping to get a community's voice heard after a decision is made. It's reactive, right? One of the things that I think we don't get to talk about enough, though, is the kind of things that Fair Shake can provide on the front end to protect communities, to help make decisions before these things happen, right? Like a lot of what we talked about today has to do with ultimately comes down to local government decisions, right? And local government makes decisions based on the information they have, right? Often they have a solicitor sitting right next to them with who's their attorney, essentially telling them what's right or wrong, what they can or can't do. And then based on that decision, that's when, you take an action, right? And we help you with that. I think it would be great, to get engaged with groups that are interested on helping on the front end, right? Like educating local governments through the law. One of the cool things we're doing right now is we're writing a guidebook for waterway access in the Delaware River Basin. And essentially, it's just a guide that tells you the law and how to follow it, right? That can be used for anything. And you can do that for local townships that want to understand zoning laws and how they can interact with that. Where can they say no? What rights do they have? These are the kinds of things that we would love to get involved with. And we're well equipped to do it, but it's often the way we interact with people, it's always after something happens. Like they don't think to call. No one's sitting at home right now like, maybe I'll call Fair Shake right now because something might happen, right? But that's ultimately like, that's the best time to call, right? I like to say, like, we always talk about, how do we defend our communities from these kinds of impacts? Well, one of the best ways to defend your community is to fill it with things that you love, right? If there's nowhere for these things to go, then there's no issue. If your community is filled with the kinds of industries you want to be there, right? Good paying industries that care, that are dedicated to the local economy. That's the best defense you can have. So I think it's just another way to look at this kind of stuff. And, we'd be happy to help on that front too.
Yeah, that sounds like a lot of what we talk about with Promote PT, working with, trying to promote sustainable technologies and sustainable ways, because it is about the economy as well. And we're actually going to have a book discussion with Eliza Griswold at the end of this month, and we've got something. I've got a little picture coming up with that. But before we go to that, I want to talk about. Trisha had a question. Ryan mentioned Maui. Is this the decision that polluted water emptying into the Pacific?
Yeah, I think so. Maui, referring to the state of Hawaii, right?
Okay, great.
Yes.
Thanks.
We'll have a blog post coming out about that soon. I'm actually working on one right now with our executive director. So
great. And Josh, if you send us a link to that, we'll post it on our Facebook so people can see it. And then so if we go to the next screen, we are going to be back next week. We're not going to have guests like we normally do. We're actually going to be promoting some of our partner organizations. The Environmental Health Project is hosting, in conjunction with PSR, Physicians for Social Responsibility, Pennsylvania. They're doing a frackland tour. This is really this is an amazing tour. This is something that usually Lois, who's pictured there, does. Brings people on tours of what it's like to live around fracking, and it's really stunning in a terrible way to see what it's like for folks like Lois, and that's really, we kind of took this proactive approach, which is funny. Trish must be on the same wavelength as I am, because it says be proactive rather than reactive. We took this proactive approach at Protect PT, to hire legal counsel, to get community members involved, to educate people, to learn as much as we could. But not every community had that opportunity. And Lois, who lives in Washington County, is inundated with development, like we would if we hadn't pushed back so much. So please join them in the Breathe Project. Earthworks is going to be there, as well as Lois is with Clean Air Council. And it's going to be really great, really great lunch hour. And we're going to be reposting it on our Facebook. And so if you'll go to the next screen, Anne, I want to mention too that we are in the middle of a membership campaign, and we would not be able to fight these legal cases. We would not be able to protect the community like we are right now if it weren't for our members. So thank you if you are a member, and we really appreciate our members. And some of our members then become volunteers, or are volunteers and do some wonderful work with us. This is actually a picture of Ryan in here with us outside the courthouse for when we were challenging our substantive validity challenge, and all of our wonderful members of the community that were standing with us in solidarity. So thank you to everybody that is a member. But if you would like to become a member, we're having a membership drive right now. And Anne, if you'll go to the next screen, we are actually, we have a lot of different really, affordable ways for you to contribute. We know that with COVID-19 happening, people are strapped for cash, and we really understand that. So you can become a member by making a very small monthly donation instead of doing a larger donation. If you can't make a donation, you could donate help. You could donate services and become a volunteer. That's a way for you to become a member as well. And so right now we're giving away some pretty awesome prizes that were given to us, that were donated by members and by Patagonia as well. So we have a duffel to give away. We have actually one of those Amazon Echoes to give away, and it's actually sitting right next to me, this Fire HT tablet to give away. So, if you go to our website, protectpt.org, you can pull them up if you go to become a member under Join Us and become a member. And if you'll click to the next screen, you'll be entered in automatically to win one of those prizes. And then on the 27th, really important, we're going to have a book discussion with Eliza Griswold about Amity and Prosperity Now. She wrote this book. It took 7 years to write this book, and it's been over a year since it came out. And we find ourselves here in Penn Township and here in Westmoreland County still having to deal with the same issues that they talk about in the book. And Ryan, one of the things that kind of struck me when I was reading the book the other day, last summer we had an amazing legal intern, Nija. She was really looking at the Oil and Gas Act and kind of that language in the Oil and Gas Act about the discretion that the DEP has, and looking at that language. And it's talked about, some of the things that we're talking about is talked about in this book, and violations to the Clean Water Act, and how many violations happened in this small community that caused health impacts. So if you haven't got the book yet, you should get it right away. There are copies available online, so you can read it online if you want through these local booksellers. There's also hard copies you can get through the local booksellers. And then right down here is our Crowdcast link to sign up for it. So please do it, and you'll be able to ask questions of Eliza. I mean, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity for us to ask questions of this Pulitzer Prize winning author. that just has such a different perspective because she's not living in the community. She has, and she's a reporter trying to get to the facts of the issues and really report on the issue itself. And it talks a lot about the history of oil and gas in Pennsylvania. It's a phenomenal book. If you haven't read it, you should read it. And please join us in the discussion and post questions because we would love to see you. And I want to thank our guests because I think you guys are amazing. We love you. You help us out so much. And if it weren't for Fair Shake and early on, and this is before any of you guys were there early on, O'Day from Fair Shake was helping us on another case, my husband and I, and that's when we learned about the well pad a half mile from our house. And he said, here's what you do. You do these 3-4 things and start working. And we did it. And that's why we've been successful. So thank you guys so much for the work you guys do in the community. And we'll be posting more from Fair Shake. So keep an eye out for them. Follow them on Facebook. And Josh, what other platforms do you want to talk about real quick?
No, I think that's great. Facebook's always great. You can sign up for our newsletter. That's why we'll keep you engaged on the work we're doing, but the work also that folks like Protect PT are doing, and all the other types of cases that we work on, and other opportunities for public participation. All of that. But also go to our website if you ever have an issue or something you want to deal with. The quickest thing to do is go to our website. You can submit your intake right there. I'll get the email. We can pass it along. Or just pick up the phone and give us a call. We are not in our offices, but we are open, and all of our lines go directly to us. So we're here for you.
Great. Well, thanks guys so much for joining us today, and we look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thanks so much, Jillian.
Bye. Bye guys. Thanks, Ryan. Bye.
Yeah.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye, Josh.